I still remember the way he laughed. Not the kind of laugh you share over an inside joke or a good story. No, this was different. Cold, sharp, dismissive. I was pouring myself a cup of stale coffee in the break room when Tyler, the new acting CEO and more importantly, the founder's only son, strolled in like he owned the place. Technically, now he did. He didn't say hello. He didn't introduce himself. He just leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes roaming the room like he was sizing up cattle. "You're Sarah, right?" His voice was casual, almost bored. I turned, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, nice to meet you, Tyler. Welcome aboard." He smirked like he was already tired of me. "Can you come to my office in 5 minutes? Bring your laptop." It wasn't a question. I felt the prickle of unease immediately. After 11 years at Cartwright Industries, you learn to recognize the early signs of trouble. And something about the way he said it, so clipped, so disinterested, made my stomach knot. 5 minutes later, I stepped into his office. He didn't even offer me a seat. He just tapped his pen against the glossy desk, a self-satisfied rhythm. "We're streamlining," he said, with the casual air of someone announcing a lunch special. "New leadership, new direction. We need lean, agile teams. You're not essential." Then he laughed. That sharp mocking sound again, like he couldn't quite believe he had to explain himself. For a second, the world blurred. Not essential? I had built the client relations department from the ground up, brought in major accounts when the company was still fighting to stay afloat. Stayed late through 3 corporate mergers, 2 restructurings, and more sleepless nights than I cared to count. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. A calm, polite, deliberate smile. "Good luck, Tyler," I said softly, and I meant it, just not in the way he thought. I packed up my desk in silence. My colleagues watched from their cubicles, wide-eyed and whispering behind their hands. Some looked like they wanted to protest, but no one moved. I didn't blame them. In environments like this, survival often depends on staying invisible. As I carried the cardboard box to my car, memories flooded me. The late nights, the impossible deadlines, the personal sacrifices. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, even my own divorce hearing because the company needed me. And now all that loyalty was reduced to a 5-minute conversation and a cruel laugh. But strangely, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt something else. A quiet certainty that Tyler had just made a mistake he couldn't undo. Because what he didn't know, what he hadn't even bothered to learn, was that I wasn't just a middle manager. I was the keystone holding up the company's biggest investor relationship. We were weeks away from closing a multi-million-dollar expansion deal with Orlin Ventures, a deal that hinged entirely on the trust I had built with their partners over years of careful negotiation. There was a clause in the preliminary agreement, one I had personally insisted on during a tense late-night call with their lead counsel. Any material changes to key personnel would require immediate renegotiation, or void the deal entirely. And now, with one arrogant decision and a laugh, Tyler had triggered that clause. He just didn't know it yet. As I sat in my car, the city lights blurring into soft streaks beyond the windshield, my phone buzzed. It was Lauren, one of the junior associates I had mentored for years. "Sarah, is it true?" She whispered into the phone, like speaking louder would make it worse. "It's true," I said simply. "I'm out." A pause. Then, with a shaky voice, "You were the only reason Orlin trusted us." I closed my eyes. "I know." Another pause, heavier this time. "What's going to happen now?" I opened my eyes, staring into the quiet, indifferent night. "I guess," I said slowly, "they're about to find out what happens when you remove the wrong piece from the foundation." Lauren said nothing. She didn't need to. As I hung up, a small part of me, the part that had been so tired for so long, felt a strange, bittersweet relief. It was over. Or at least, my part of it was. For now. Because Tyler's first day in charge wasn't going to be remembered for his bold leadership or his streamlined vision. It was going to be remembered for something else entirely. And tomorrow, when the investors called, when the board demanded answers, he would realize just how essential I had really been. I didn't sleep much that night. I didn't toss and turn either. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange, humming tension in the air, the kind you get right before a storm breaks. By 7 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in front of me, scrolling absent-mindedly through news alerts on my phone. Nothing yet. No signs of trouble. Maybe, I thought, they'll patch it up before it gets worse. But deep down, I knew better. At 8:13 a.m., my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lauren. Lauren. They're panicking. Investors were supposed to call at 9. Tyler's been in a conference room with legal since 7:30. I smiled faintly, feeling the first real ripple of satisfaction since the moment he fired me. I could picture it perfectly. Tyler pacing the glass conference room, trying to bluff his way through a crisis he didn't even fully understand. Legal flipping through contracts, finding the clause, the one I had insisted on, staring at it in growing horror. I sipped my cold coffee. The day was only beginning. At 8:45 a.m., another message came through, this time from Matt, an old friend in the finance department. Matt. Sarah, they're losing it. Board members are already calling in. They heard about the firing yesterday, and now they're asking how it affects the Orlin deal. I leaned back in my chair. It was happening even faster than I expected. You see, Orlin Ventures wasn't just any investor. They were the kind of group that made companies like Cartwright Industries. Their name alone opened doors, and Tyler's arrogance hadn't just jeopardized a deal, it had shaken their trust. By 9:05 a.m., the fallout began in earnest. Lauren messaged again. Lauren, investors on the call now. Tyler is stammering. Mr. Cartwright just stormed in. That made me sit up straight. Mr. Cartwright, Tyler's father, had been semi-retired for a year now, traveling between the company's global offices, letting Tyler earn his stripes. He hadn't planned to be in the building this morning. The fact that he was meant things were worse than I thought. At 9:21 a.m., Lauren sent a final text. Lauren, you're not going to believe this. Mr. Cartwright screamed at Tyler. What did you do? That was our key to the deal. The whole office heard it. I let out a slow breath, feeling a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. It wasn't just about the deal. It was about everything I had built over the past decade. The trust, the relationships, the foundation that had made Cartwright Industries strong. And Tyler had kicked it all aside without even asking who had put it there. At 9:30 a.m., my own phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won again. Sarah, it's Mr. Cartwright. His voice was tight, strained, a man barely holding himself together. I need to speak with you, he said. Today? Please. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I could almost hear the desperation bleeding through the phone. About what? I asked, my voice calm. The Orlin Ventures deal, he said immediately. They're reconsidering. They said the termination of key personnel violates preliminary agreements. They want a meeting with you. Only you. They won't speak to anyone else. Another long silence. Please, Sarah, he added. We didn't realize... I cut him off gently. You didn't ask. He exhaled a heavy breath. You're right. And Tyler. Tyler didn't understand. I thought he was ready. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I'll come in, I said finally, on one condition. Anything, he said without hesitation. I deal directly with you, I said, not Tyler. Another beat of silence, then, agreed. I ended the call and set my phone down carefully, my hand steady. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even vindication. It was something quieter, deeper, a sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing approval or recognition. I was standing in the value I knew I brought to the table. And if they wanted me back, even temporarily, they would meet me there, on my terms. As I got dressed, pulling on a sharp, simple suit, I caught my reflection in the mirror. There were lines at the corners of my eyes now. A little more silver near my temples. Proof, I thought, of every battle I had fought quietly while others claimed the victories. Today would be different. Today, I wouldn't fight for a seat at the table. Today, I was the table. And Tyler, poor, arrogant Tyler, was about to find out exactly what it meant to lose someone who had been essential all along. The lobby was almost painfully bright when I walked in, sunlight bouncing off the polished marble floors. It felt strange stepping back into Cartwright Industries. Not as an employee, not exactly, but as something different, something stronger. The receptionist looked up and immediately straightened. "Ms. Bennett? Sarah," she stammered. "Mr. Cartwright is expecting you. 11th floor." I nodded once, calm. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I caught my reflection in the gleaming steel. Composed, sharp, unreadable. Exactly how I needed to be today. When the doors opened, I stepped into the executive floor, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations dropped to whispers. Heads turned. People knew. Not just about what had happened, but about why I was here now. Tyler was standing near the glass conference room, arms crossed, fake laughing at something a junior executive said. When he saw me, the color drained from his face. He quickly masked it with a smirk. "Look who's back," he called out, loud enough for half the floor to hear. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" I didn't stop walking, didn't answer, didn't even blink. I just moved past him, the soft click of my heels the only sound in the sudden silence. Let him flail. Let him scramble. His words couldn't touch me anymore. Mr. Cartwright met me outside his office. He looked older than the last time I saw him. Tired, frayed around the edges in a way no expensive suit could hide. "Sarah," he said quietly, offering his hand. I shook it, firmly, but without warmth. There were still things that needed to be said. Later. For now, we had a deal to save. Inside his office, the windows framed the city skyline like a painting. He gestured for me to sit. "I'm sorry for how this was handled," he began, voice low. "You didn't deserve it." I let the silence stretch a moment longer before nodding once. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. Not yet. He cleared his throat, laying a thick file on the desk between us. "The Orland team is waiting for a call. They're ready to pull out entirely unless you're personally involved. I've managed to buy us a few hours." I flipped open the file. Panic was all over it. Hastily written notes, amended contracts, emails sent at 2 a.m., begging for reconsideration. Amateur hour. I closed the file calmly. "I'll talk to them," I said. But before that, I needed in writing. He didn't hesitate. Already printed and waiting was a letter formalizing my authority over the Orland deal, without interference from anyone, especially Tyler. I scanned it carefully, signed it. Only then did I allow myself a small, almost imperceptible breath of relief. "Let's get started," I said. He nodded, reaching for the speakerphone. Before he could dial, there was a sharp knock at the door, and Tyler barged in without waiting for an answer. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, looking directly at me. "You're going to let her—" "Enough!" Mr. Cartwright barked, voice like a whip crack. Tyler recoiled, blinking. "I trusted you," Mr. Cartwright continued, his voice shaking not with anger but disappointment. "I trusted you to lead, to respect the people who built this company, and instead you tried to gut it like a toy you didn't understand." Tyler opened his mouth, but Mr. Cartwright cut him off again. "You fired the one person holding together our most important partnership. You didn't even read the personnel clauses. You risked the future of this company for what? Your ego?" The room crackled with tension. I stayed silent, letting Mr. Cartwright fight his own battle. You're suspended from all decision-making effective immediately, Mr. Cartwright said. Legal is drafting the paperwork now. If the Orland deal falls through because of you, the board will vote on your removal. Tyler's face turned a mottled red. For the first time, he looked genuinely stunned, like the reality of what he'd done was finally breaking through the walls of entitlement he'd lived behind for so long. This isn't over. He hissed at me as he stormed out. I didn't respond. It wasn't worth it. Once the door slammed behind him, Mr. Cartwright sagged into his chair. I should have seen it coming, he muttered. I looked at him steadily. Blind faith is dangerous, I said quietly, especially when it blinds you to the truth. He gave a weary nod, then punched in the number for Orland Ventures. As the line rang, I straightened my shoulders, ready to step back into the arena. Not for them, not for him, but for myself. Because sometimes the most powerful statement you can make isn't slamming the door on the way out. It's walking back through it, stronger than ever, and setting new terms. The call connected. The room fell silent. It was time. Good morning, I said, my voice even as the speakerphone clicked in Word. I could hear the faint background noise of an office on the other side, papers rustling, keyboards tapping, the muted tension of people holding their breath. Sarah, came the voice of Jonathan Pierce, the lead partner at Orland Ventures. He didn't sound angry. Worse, he sounded cold. We were surprised to hear about your departure, he said carefully. I glanced at Mr. Cartwright. He was sitting rigidly in his chair, his hands balled into fists on top of his desk. He didn't say a word. My departure, I said calmly, was not voluntary, nor was it strategic. I can assure you of that. There was a pause. I could almost feel them weighing my words, deciding whether to trust me. Jonathan spoke again, voice clipped. We were under the impression that you were an integral part of this deal, that the trust we extended was, in large part, because of your personal stewardship. You were correct, I said simply, and I take that responsibility seriously. Another silence. The heavy, expectant kind that tightens around your throat. They were giving me a chance. One. And only one. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. The conditions we negotiated were based not just on numbers or promises, but on the relationship we built over the last 2 years. A relationship based on consistency, transparency, and mutual respect. I'm here today to ensure that remains intact. Jonathan exhaled audibly through the speaker. Then tell us this. If leadership at Cartwright Industries is unstable, how can we trust that our investment will be protected? A brutal question. A fair one. I didn't flinch. Leadership isn't a title, I said, my voice calm but firm. It's accountability. It's action. I'm still here, still standing by every commitment we made. The missteps of one individual, someone who is no longer involved, don't erase the foundation we built. If anything, it proves how critical it is to trust the right people, not just the ones with fancy titles. Another beat of silence. Mr. Cartwright sat frozen, almost afraid to breathe. Finally, Jonathan's voice returned, slightly softer. We appreciate your honesty, Sarah. Before I could answer, another voice joined the call, one I hadn't expected. Rebecca Lynn, Orland's chief legal advisor. I reviewed the personnel clauses in the preliminary agreement, she said crisply. We are well within our rights to walk away with no penalty. I know, I said simply. Another pause. But, she continued, we also recognize that mistakes happen. Provided that Sarah remains the primary liaison moving forward with contractual authority, we are willing to proceed. On one condition. I raised an eyebrow, though they couldn't see it. What condition? I asked. That Cartwright Industries issues a formal acknowledgement of the mistake and recommits to the leadership continuity clause in writing. I didn't look at Mr. Cartwright. I didn't need to. This was the price of trust lost, and the only way to rebuild it. You'll have it by end of day, I said. Jonathan cleared his throat. In that case, we're willing to continue negotiations. The tension in the room finally cracked, like ice breaking underfoot. Mr. Cartwright sagged slightly in his chair, relief washing over him in a visible wave. Thank you, Sarah, Jonathan added, his voice warmer now. We trusted you before. You've only reinforced why. The call ended with formalities and promises of next steps, but I barely heard them. All I could focus on was the steady thrum of adrenaline in my veins, not from fear, but from the knowledge that I had held the line, that I had been tested, and I hadn't flinched. When the call finally disconnected, Mr. Cartwright exhaled loudly. You saved us, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You really... I held up a hand. I didn't do it for you, I said quietly. I did it for the people who built this company long before Tyler decided to tear it apart. He nodded slowly, shame flickering across his face. You deserve better, he said. I know, I replied. I stood, gathering my notes, the finality of the moment settling over me like a second skin. As I moved toward the door, Mr. Cartwright spoke again. Sarah, he said, we need you here, permanently. Not just to fix this, but to lead. To help rebuild. I paused, hand on the doorframe. I'll consider it, I said over my shoulder, and I meant it. But if I returned, it would be on my terms. No more silent sacrifices, no more invisible labor. If they wanted me to rebuild what Tyler almost destroyed, they'd have to recognize the difference between someone who inherits power and someone who earns it. And this time, I wouldn't let them forget it. The rest of that day moved in a blur. By late afternoon, the new paperwork was signed. Orlin Ventures had officially agreed to continue, and the company's board sent out a carefully worded internal memo. Effective immediately, Sarah Bennett will serve as interim head of client relations, reporting directly to the CEO. It was a victory, on paper at least, but anyone who's ever worked in a place like Cartwright Industries knows victories aren't always the end of the war. Sometimes they just mark the beginning of a new kind of battle. The first hint came barely an hour later. An email from HR popped up on my screen, requesting a routine meeting to reconfirm leadership roles in light of recent changes. It sounded innocent enough, but the timing was too perfect, too neat. I responded politely, setting the meeting for the next morning. Then I sat back in my chair and thought about what was really happening. Tyler might have been publicly sidelined, but men like him didn't just fade quietly into the background. No, they regrouped. They plotted. And if he couldn't confront me directly, he would find another way. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, I walked the halls of the office, letting my footsteps echo against the polished floors. The place felt different now. Not better, not yet. Just exposed. Like all the polite smiles and corporate slogans had been stripped away, and all that was left was the raw machinery underneath. Power, ambition, fear. I paused outside the break room, hearing low voices inside. I'm telling you, a woman's voice whispered, sharp and nervous. She's not going to last. Tyler's got people still backing him. Another voice answered, lower, male, smug. Doesn't matter if she saved the deal. She's a liability now. Too much attention. I turned and walked away before they saw me. I didn't need to know their names. I didn't need to confront them. I already understood. Tyler had started something the day he fired me. A rot. And cutting him out wasn't enough to cure it. He had left behind people who benefited from the chaos, people who had hitched their futures to his rise. And now they were scrambling to protect themselves. By the time I got home that night, the weight of it all settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, thinking. I had a choice. I could walk away, take the win, leave the mess behind, start fresh somewhere else. Plenty of companies would kill to have someone who had just salvaged a multi-million-dollar partnership under pressure. Or I could stay. Stay and fight, stay and rebuild. But rebuilding meant more than paperwork. It meant cutting out the rot at the roots. It meant long nights, tough conversations, enemies hiding in plain sight. It meant becoming a leader not just in title, but in truth. Was I ready for that? I didn't know. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed, I wouldn't survive by being quiet anymore. I wouldn't survive by playing nice with people who smiled to my face and sharpened knives behind my back. I would survive by being exactly who they feared the most. A woman who knew her worth, who didn't flinch, who kept receipts. At midnight, as the city pulsed quietly around me, I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Everything I had seen, every whisper, every strange delay, every suspicious change to files and meetings, a paper trail of shadows. Because if Tyler or anyone loyal to him thought they could erase me with rumors and whispers, they had underestimated me all over again. And next time, when they tried to come for me, I would be ready. The battle wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. And this time, I wasn't the one walking into traps. I was the one setting them. The next morning, I walked into the HR meeting 15 minutes early. The conference room was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything feel sharper, more brittle. I took a seat at the far end of the table, notebook in hand, face calm. If they were setting a trap, they would find I'd brought my own. 2 HR representatives arrived, polite, overly formal. And just behind them, to no surprise, Tyler slinked into the room, a smug smile plastered across his face. He wasn't supposed to be here, but clearly he thought he still had moves to play. Sarah, one of the HR reps began, smoothing out a folder. We're here to discuss some concerns that have been raised regarding your recent behavior. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to be intrigued. Concerns? I echoed. The second rep, a woman named Marla, whom I'd worked with for years, looked genuinely uncomfortable. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She didn't need to. I already knew what this was. Tyler shifted forward eagerly. There have been questions, he said, voice syrupy sweet, about your ability to manage high-pressure relationships. Some feel that your recent actions, while successful in the short term, might suggest instability, Marla finished quietly. There it was, the classic smear tactic. Plant a seed of doubt. Whisper about instability just enough to taint someone's reputation without any hard evidence. And then step back, pretending it had all been concern for the company's best interests. I smiled. A small, knowing smile that made Tyler's smugness falter for just a second. I opened my notebook, flipping neatly to the pages I had filled the night before. Before we proceed, I said, voice crisp, I'd like to submit some documentation for the record. The HR reps blinked. Tyler froze. I slid the pages across the table, detailed notes of every questionable interaction I'd witnessed over the past week. Mysterious email delays, files missing authorization, false rumors seeded through specific departments, dates, times, witnesses. I've also reported potential IT security breaches, I added smoothly. Attached are confirmation emails from our systems department. As of last night, an internal audit has been initiated at the CEO's request. Now it was Marla's turn to look shocked. You reported this already? She asked, glancing nervously at Tyler. Of course, I said. Weeks ago, when the first signs appeared. I take my responsibilities seriously. The silence that followed was absolute. Tyler opened his mouth, struggling for words, but no defense came. He had played his hand too soon, and I had been ready. I leaned back slightly in my chair, watching the realization sink into his face like ink into water. He was exposed, not just to me, but now to HR, to the systems department, and soon to the board. He had underestimated me every step of the way. And now, there was nowhere left to hide. Mr. Cartwright walked into the room moments later, summoned by Marla's silent, desperate text. When he saw the documents on the table, and the look on Tyler's face, He didn't need an explanation. "I think this meeting is over," Mr. Cartwright said coldly. Tyler turned, sputtering. "Dad, listen. It's not what it looks like. She's just—" "You," Mr. Cartwright cut him off, "are done." There was no yelling this time. No dramatics. Just a simple, final statement of fact. HR escorted Tyler out of the building that afternoon. No goodbye party. No golden handshake. Just silence. And me? I stayed. Not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because leadership isn't about surviving storms. It's about standing tall in their aftermath, when others have fled. In the days that followed, the office changed in ways I hadn't thought possible. People looked me in the eye again. Departments started working together instead of hoarding information. For the first time in a long time, there was hope. And on Friday morning, Mr. Cartwright called me into his office. There was no ceremony, no staged applause. Just a simple letter slid across the desk. Chief Operating Officer. Effective immediately. I looked up at him. "You earned it," he said simply. I took the letter, folded it once, and slid it into my bag. No tears, no speeches. Just a quiet, steady acceptance of what I had fought for, and won. Later that evening, as I left the office, the city stretched out before me, glittering with possibilities. I knew challenges would come. There would always be new storms to weather, new battles to fight. But I also knew something far more important now. That strength isn't in how loud you shout. It's in how quietly you refuse to break. And no one, not even a boss's spoiled son, could ever take that away from me again. They always say change is good. But on that Monday morning, as I sat across from the new boss I'd barely met, with a weak cup of office coffee cooling in my hands, change felt like a knife in the back. His name was Logan. Logan Pierce. 30-something. Expensive suit. Gelled hair. The kind of man who spoke like a TED Talk but listened like a brick wall. It was his first day. Mine? My 3,214th. 10 years. 10 years of early mornings, late nights, skipped vacations, patched systems, and quiet successes. I didn't need applause. I needed respect. And now, with his lips curled into a corporate smirk, Logan was about to throw it all away before even learning how the coffee machine worked. He leaned back, steepling his fingers like he'd practiced this exact posture in front of a mirror. "Jenna," he began, voice smooth like a marketing pitch. "This isn't personal. We're just restructuring. Fresh faces, new energy. You understand, right?" I stared at him for a second, letting the silence settle. "Of course," I said, my voice even. "Thanks for the notice." His smile widened. He thought I was being professional, cooperative, maybe even grateful. But deep down, I wasn't even angry yet. Not yet. I stood slowly, brushing non-existent dust from my blazer. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. Polished. The version of me they had grown used to. Composed, competent, quiet. I knew every corner of this building, every weakness in its systems, every shortcut in its code. Because I built them. From the ground up. And he had no idea. No idea that the software he was about to gamble the company's future on, my software, wasn't theirs to command. The patent was in my name. Filed years ago. Ironclad. I walked out of the office without another word, the door clicking softly behind me. The hallway felt longer than usual, fluorescent lights buzzing above me. My coworkers were glued to their screens, whispering, stealing glances. The news had spread like it always did in corporate buildings. Not officially, but fast. Nobody met my eyes. No one ever does when loyalty becomes inconvenient. Back at my desk, I packed my things slowly. A photo of me and my brother from a hiking trip in Oregon. A coffee mug with a cracked handle. A small cactus I'd named Wallace that somehow survived 3 office moves. I moved deliberately, letting the routine ground me. My badge, my USB key, And finally, my laptop. That's when the ache began to set in. Not anger, not sadness, but something heavier. Betrayal. I had built that system during sleepless nights when the budget didn't allow for another engineer. I had documented every step, designed every patch, and made sure no one could manipulate it without the proper keys. My keys. I had warned the board years ago. Put my name on the software or I walk. They agreed, signed the documents, filed the paperwork, then forgot. They always forget the woman behind the curtain until the curtain collapses. By the time I got home, the weight of the day began to settle. I changed into sweatpants, sat at my kitchen counter, and stared blankly at the blinking cursor on my laptop. But instead of tears, a slow, cold clarity washed over me. Logan Pierce had made a mistake. He thought he was cutting costs. He thought I was replaceable. He thought I was just an employee. What he didn't know was that the very foundation of Archer Systems, the database infrastructure, the client dashboards, the custom logic trees that held every deal together, belonged to me. And in 5 days, I would make sure he knew it. Because the license? It had to be renewed every fiscal quarter. And Friday at midnight, it expired. I had 2 options. Renew it quietly and walk away with my pride, or let the software revert to restricted mode. A locked system. Inaccessible without my private key. No sabotage, no hacking. Just business. Their game, my rules. I sipped my tea slowly, my mind calculating every angle. If they wanted to save themselves, they'd have to crawl back. Not for my job, but for permission to keep the company running. A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. The same kind Logan had worn this morning. Let's see how he liked it. Next Friday would be unforgettable. And I wouldn't even have to raise my voice. Tuesday morning arrived like any other, but the air in the office felt different. Too quiet, too aware. I walked in through the front doors of Archer Systems like I had every day for the past decade. Nobody stopped me. Of course they didn't. HR hadn't processed anything yet. Paperwork takes time. Until then, I was still technically employed. Still expected to be professional. Still expected to smile. I did, but it wasn't the kind of smile they were used to. Logan's office door was closed. Probably busy adjusting his chair, hanging his degrees on the wall, pretending he understood the business he'd just inherited. He had no idea I was already preparing the slow collapse of his perfect little first week. 5 days. That's all they had left. I reached my desk. Well, the desk I used to call mine, and found a young woman sitting there. Fresh out of grad school by the look of her. Wide eyes, nervous fingers. She stood up quickly when she saw me. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you'd be coming in," she stammered. I smiled politely. "No worries. Transition period. I'm here to help." Her name was Emily. She'd been hired to replace me, though she didn't know the full story. Yet. She offered me a tight, embarrassed smile as I pulled a chair next to her and began explaining the system. I showed her the user interface, the code-based structure, and how the client dashboards worked. She asked good questions. Smart, thoughtful, but I could tell it was overwhelming. The system was complex. Purposefully complex. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Archer Systems managed hundreds of millions in client data. There were no shortcuts. Every corner of the architecture required precision, depth, experience, none of which Logan had, and none of which Emily could fake. As the hours passed, I kept my tone even, my manner calm. I wasn't cruel. I didn't want to sabotage her. She wasn't the problem. She was just a symptom of a deeper sickness in this industry. The assumption that value could be replaced, that experience could be downloaded like an update. But some things can't be replaced. Some people shouldn't be replaced. At noon, I went to the cafe across the street and sat by the window, my laptop open in front of me. I pulled up the original patent files, the ones I'd kept saved in encrypted cloud storage for years. I reread every line just to be sure. Everything was airtight. All rights, including derivative systems and extensions, remain the sole property of the original architect unless expressly transferred through a written and signed agreement. There was no such agreement. Archer Systems never thought they'd need one. That was their first mistake. I sipped my coffee slowly as I opened a second tab and began drafting the formal revocation notice. Calm, legal, effective. It wouldn't lock them out entirely. It would revert their systems to evaluation mode, restricted access, limited functionality, just enough to paralyze them, just enough to make them remember my name. I didn't send it yet. Not today. The timing had to be perfect. The license expired at 11:59 p.m. Friday. If I submitted the notice Friday at 6 a.m., it would trigger the automatic reversion by close of business, right when their biggest weekly report was due, right when clients logged in to access updated dashboards. The fallout would be instant and untraceable. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the window. Across the street, I saw Logan stepping out of the building, phone pressed to his ear. He laughed at something. Loud, confident, unaware. He had no clue the company he was leading was balanced on a wire, that the wire was mine, that I could cut it any time. Back upstairs, Emily was waiting for me, trying to troubleshoot a minor bug in the analytics module. I guided her through it, watching her hands tremble slightly as she typed. "You okay?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Yeah, just a lot to take in. They told me the system was simple." I gave a short laugh. They always do. She paused, looking at me. "Why are you helping me?" I met her eyes. "Because it's not your fault." That was the truth. I had no bitterness toward her. My war wasn't with the innocent. It was with the arrogant. With the people who thought power meant you could discard the very foundation of your success and still stand tall. By 5:30 p.m., I left the office with nothing in my hands but my phone. I didn't need to take anything with me. They were already standing on my work. The question wasn't if they'd fall, it was how loud the crash would be, and whether anyone would try to stop it before it was too late. By Wednesday, the air in the office had changed. It was subtle at first. Whispers behind closed doors, longer than usual meetings, a flurry of emails with subject lines like urgent, dashboard delay, or client login timeout. I recognized the signs immediately. The system wasn't crashing, yet, but it was starting to cough, stumble, like an engine that had been pushed too hard without ever being serviced. I knew exactly why. Emily approached me in the late morning, her brow furrowed, frustration written all over her face. She was holding a sticky note with hastily scribbled client IDs. "Jenna," she said, "3 different users are locked out of the analytics dashboard, and the system's throwing an authentication error when I try to reset their access. I followed the steps you showed me." She was doing her best. I could see that. She was smart, but the system wasn't built for beginners. It had layers, protections, conditional structures that even experienced engineers had to unravel like puzzles. "I'll take a look," I said calmly, and together we sat at the desk. The problem wasn't in the code. It was in the license. The expiration had begun a soft countdown. Quiet, but visible if you knew where to look. A warning message embedded in the back-end logs. Evaluation period ending in 2 days. Renew license or expect restricted access. The system was obeying its instructions perfectly. Everything was unfolding exactly as I designed it. And no one, certainly not Logan, had any idea what was coming. At 2 p.m., the office held its usual all-hands meeting in the glass conference room. Logan stood at the head of the table like a man who still believed he was in control. His tone was cheerful, but I could tell it was forced. Too upbeat. Too polished. "I just want to say I'm really proud of how everyone's adapting," he began, clasping his hands together. "I know transitions can be tough, but I'm confident that this team, especially with fresh talent like Emily, is moving in the right direction." There it was again. The casual dismissal of experience, the glorification of new blood as if loyalty and knowledge were liabilities instead of assets. I said nothing. I just watched him. Any questions before we wrap? Logan asked, scanning the room. There was a brief pause, then Anthony from IT raised his hand. Yeah, actually, some clients have been experiencing login delays and reporting partial outages on their dashboards. We're looking into it, but it's been tough to trace. Logan didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Just growing pains, he said with a grin. We'll sort it out. I nearly laughed out loud. That was his answer? Growing pains? No one said anything else. The meeting ended in awkward silence, with employees exchanging side glances as they returned to their desks. Anthony passed me on his way out and muttered under his breath, "It's getting worse." I know. I replied softly. Back at my own station, I opened my terminal and ran a passive diagnostic. Not to fix it, but to watch it. The system was still functional, but the errors were escalating. Minor things. Refresh lag, API call failures, intermittent timeouts. But the real collapse would come Friday. These were just tremors before the quake. I could have warned them. I could have told Logan to check the license. But I didn't. I had warned them years ago. They chose to forget. They chose arrogance over respect. Now they could deal with the consequences. That evening, as I walked out of the building, I saw Logan in the lobby, talking animatedly to someone on the phone. His voice was tight now, tinged with frustration. Not panic, yet, but tension. He glanced at me as I passed, giving a curt nod. I returned it with a blank expression. In his mind, I was still just a box to check. A courtesy. A relic of the old guard being phased out. He hadn't connected the dots. Not yet. At home, I lit a candle, made tea, and opened my laptop. The revocation letter was ready. Sitting in draft. I read it over one more time. Per patent number 1185-43-B, ownership of all proprietary systems and associated frameworks remains solely with the creator. Effective immediately. Access is rescinded. All I had to do was click send. But not tonight. Tomorrow, the final day, would be the turning point. The cracks were visible. But they still didn't believe the building could fall. They would. Thursday felt like the moment right before a storm. Still, heavy, waiting. When I stepped into the office, the silence wasn't just awkward. It was brittle. As if the entire building knew something was wrong but didn't dare say it out loud. I walked past rows of desks where conversations were reduced to whispers, where monitors flashed with error screens and support tickets piled up faster than IT could respond. I saw Anthony pacing by the server room, phone pressed to his ear. He looked up and gave me a grim nod. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. The system was unraveling. The first signs were subtle. The client dashboard refused to load for a handful of users in Europe. Then came the misfires. Data exports timing out, notifications failing to send, the reporting engine choking on its own scripts. Every error was a symptom of the same underlying cause. The license was expiring. And by now, the system was loudly reminding them of it. Back at my temporary station, I logged in and quietly observed the logs. Warnings filled the screen. Alert license status. Expiring in 14 hours. Warning, access to key modules will be restricted at 11:59 p.m. EST. Error licensing API authentication failed. Invalid renewal token. Still, no one had come to me. Not Logan. Not HR. Not even the board. They were scrambling behind closed doors, no doubt pointing fingers, trying to patch something they didn't understand. I imagine Logan sitting in his office, furiously Googling software licensing crisis, while Emily quietly panicked under the pressure she never signed up for. It would have been almost funny, if it wasn't so predictable. By noon, the first escalation came through. One of our largest clients, a financial firm in Chicago, couldn't access their quarterly analytics dashboard. Their COO personally emailed Logan and CC'd 3 board members. Logan stormed out of his office a few minutes later, face red, tie loosened, voice strained. "Where's Jenna?" he barked. I stood calmly. Right here. He approached fast, like a man who'd suddenly realized the fire he ignored had reached his front door. Have you been seeing these issues? Why didn't anyone tell me this was happening? I tilted my head. People have been talking about it for 2 days. Anthony flagged it in the meeting yesterday. He blinked. For a moment, I saw it. The fear. A crack in the confident facade. Can you fix it? He asked, trying to keep his voice level. I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted the silence to settle. I wanted him to feel what it was like to wait for someone else's mercy. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you still think I'm replaceable. His mouth opened, closed, no reply. I returned to my seat. I'll be here until the end of the day, as agreed. After that, I'm no longer under contract. Logan stood there a second longer before retreating to his office. The rest of the staff had heard everything. A few people stared, most quickly looked away. But the balance had shifted, and they felt it. That evening, I left precisely at 5. No overtime, no courtesy. I walked past Logan's office without a glance. He was still there, slouched over his desk, shoulders hunched, staring at a screen filled with numbers he couldn't fix. At home, the sky outside my apartment was turning dark, streaked with red like the last breath of daylight. I brewed a cup of tea, sat at my desk, and opened the email draft one final time. No edits needed. I clicked send. The legal revocation letter was delivered to Archer Systems, its executive team, and their legal counsel. The subject line was simple. Termination of software license, effective midnight. I exhaled. It was done. I didn't scream. I didn't celebrate. I simply shut my laptop and let the weight of 10 years roll off my shoulders. Tomorrow would be Friday, and everything they depended on would start slipping through their fingers. Not because I sabotaged anything, but because they let go of the one person who had been holding it all together. Friday, 6 a.m. My alarm went off, but I was already awake. I'd been up since 5, sipping coffee at my kitchen window, watching the city stretch into life below. On the surface, it looked like any other morning, but I knew better. I opened my inbox. A flood of replies had already come in overnight. Legal inquiries, auto-generated server warnings, a failed attempt to renew the license. Too late. At exactly 11:59 p.m. the night before, Archer Systems' access to my software had officially expired. Not hacked, not broken, just revoked. Clean, legal, final. The moment they opened their eyes today, they'd step into a world without a working foundation. I took a long sip of coffee as I opened the remote monitoring panel, my quiet little backdoor view into the system's diagnostics. I didn't interfere. I simply watched. 7:32 a.m. System alert, core modules offline. Error, authentication server not responding. Alert, analytics dashboard unavailable. Critical client access denied. Invalid license, it had begun. By 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. Emily. I let it ring the first time. On the second, I answered. Jenna? Hey, it's happening. Everything's failing. Client logins, dashboards, internal portals. Anthony's losing it, and Logan he's panicking. Her voice was laced with fear. Not for herself, but for the mess she'd walked into. Did you check the logs? I asked calmly. Yes, it says the license is invalid. But how can that? I revoked it, I said softly. Silence. But why didn't you tell anyone? I did, I replied. Just not recently. It was never their software, Emily. They just acted like it was. She didn't respond right away. Eventually, she whispered, Logan's going to freak. Sounds like he already has. I ended the call. At 9:12 a.m., the news reached me before they could. System-wide failure hits Archer Systems. Clients unable to access financial platforms. Major outage in progress. By 9:30 a.m., my phone lit up again, this time from a blocked number. I didn't need to guess. I answered. Jenna. Logan's voice was tight, brittle. We have a situation. I know. The software. Your software. Shut down. Everything is failing. The client portals, the internal database, the reporting tools. The board is calling. Clients are threatening lawsuits. What the hell did you do? I didn't do anything, I said coolly. I just stopped doing everything for you. You can't be serious. We had a deal. You were supposed to finish the transition. You ended the deal. You ended it on your first day. A beat of silence. Then, softer. Look, we can figure this out. Just tell me what you want. I'll talk to the board. It's too late. No, come on, Jenna. Be reasonable. Name your price. I almost laughed. Now he wanted to negotiate. Now that the walls were collapsing and the alarms were blaring. You don't get it, do you? I said. This isn't about money. You fired the person holding your company together. Now you're watching what happens when that person leaves. Please, he said. And it wasn't just panic anymore. It was desperation. I'm not coming back, Logan, I said quietly. I've already moved on. Maybe you should too. I hung up. And just like that, the weight I had carried for 10 years, every late night, every ignored idea, every board meeting where my name wasn't even mentioned, lifted. They were finally seeing what I had been all along. Essential. And they were seeing it too late. By noon, Archer Systems was trending on social media. For all the wrong reasons. Clients furious after massive Archer outage. Internal source confirms licensing failure, company in chaos. Stock plummets 19% in morning trading. I refreshed my feed and watched the panic spread. Investors pulling out. Clients demanding answers. Former employees posting thinly veiled I told you so messages. And I did nothing. No interviews, no gloating, no retaliation. I didn't need to destroy them. They were doing that all on their own. By Friday evening, Archer Systems was in free fall. Their website had been reduced to a single error message. Support hotlines were flooded. News outlets circled like vultures. And inside their glass tower, executives scrambled to rewrite contracts, calm investors, and spin a story no one was buying. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my balcony, legs curled under me, watching the skyline flicker in the dusk. The noise, the chaos, the panic, it all felt so far away now. Like watching a storm roll through a town you no longer lived in. My phone buzzed again. Logan. The 6th time that day. I let it go to voicemail. Then I played it back. Jenna, listen. The board. Everyone's looking to me for answers, and I don't have any. The software's locked. Legal says there's no way around it without your approval. The clients are threatening legal action. I know I screwed up. I was arrogant. I didn't ask questions. I didn't respect what you built. Please, just call me back. His voice cracked slightly near the end. It wasn't the sound of a man in control anymore. It was the sound of a man who finally understood the cost of cutting corners. I didn't call him back. Because this story wasn't about Logan Pierce anymore. It was about me. About the 10 years I spent giving everything to a company that saw me as a line item. About the mornings I showed up early, the weekends I spent troubleshooting someone else's mistake, the ideas I shared in meetings only to have someone else repeat them louder. And now? Now they were left holding a hollow empire, gutted by their own carelessness. I opened my laptop one last time and checked my inbox. Offers, dozens. Tech firms, venture capitalists, startups, even a few competitors of Archer Systems who were now very, very interested in the woman who brought a multi-million-dollar company to its knees without raising her voice. But I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't looking to build someone else's dream again. So I hit delete. Every offer, every flattery-filled message, every corporate pitch. Gone. I didn't need validation. I needed vision. The next morning, I walked into the offices of a small but well-connected venture group downtown. The founder was a woman I'd met years ago at a conference, someone who remembered my name when no one else did. She greeted me with a smile. Jenna Sinclair, Word travels fast. I smiled back. So I've heard. We sat down in her sunlit corner office. She didn't waste time. So, what do you want to build? I told her. Not another bloated, top-down tech firm. No corporate rot. No faceless middle management. A lean, agile company that prioritized brilliance over bureaucracy, where creators owned their work, where engineers had a voice, where respect wasn't a buzzword. It was built into the code. By the time I finished, she nodded once. We'll fund it, whatever you need. I shook her hand, and just like that, I wasn't the woman who'd been fired on a Monday anymore. I was the woman who wrote her own beginning. Back at home, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and opened a clean document on my screen. I titled it, Foundations. Not just a business plan, a blueprint. For a new kind of company, one that didn't treat loyalty like a weakness. One that didn't assume quiet meant small. One that understood the real cost of overlooking the people who built the walls they leaned on. As I typed, my phone buzzed again. One final message from Logan. Jenna, I resigned. Effective immediately. I hope you're happy. I stared at the screen for a moment, then deleted the message without replying. It wasn't happiness I felt. It was something deeper. Freedom. They had tried to erase me, but I hadn't disappeared. I evolved. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before me. Open, alive, waiting. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, and it tasted better than anything money could buy. Because the truth is, the best revenge isn't destroying what tried to bury you. It's becoming someone they can never reach again.